What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Ask Paul, the only podcast out there where you can submit your questions to me directly and get answers to those pressing code questions or the secret of life, whatever you want to do. Just simply go over to paulabernathy.com. It's a simple portal over there. You fill in your information, you send your question, you click the submit button, and it comes to me. And if I answer your question via email, or if you're one of the lucky chosen few, you get your question answered on our podcast. And so if you want more information on that, again, on how you can submit questions or even listen to past episodes directly, go to paulabernathy.com. There's a little link there that lets you listen to all the specific Ask Paul segments directly from that website. But that is a portal that's designed for you. You don't pay anything. You get to go and submit and get answers. And then if you don't like my opinion, then go somewhere else and get your answer. But I'm going to give you my opinion, and I'm going to give you my in-depth review of it. And you can choose whatever you want, because the beautiful thing about the electrical industry, and more specifically electrical codes, is your opinion is your opinion. You can do your best to interpret it. What I do is I do a little research in my interpretations, plus my over 30 plus years of experience in industry. It's just how I have to interpret something. Again, you can agree to disagree. You're probably much smarter than me, so you make that decision on your own, but I'm going to give you my opinion of it. Okay, so today's Ask Paul question. Oh, I should say, all of this is also sponsored by Electrical Code Academy, which is, again, our corporation that we basically do an awful lot of educational training and other things like that. Just if you're interested in that, go on over to electricalcodeacademy.net. Of course, you can use the .org or .com. It doesn't matter. And you can even go to masterthenec.com, .net or .org, whatever your flavor. And you can look and see what we have to offer in our programs, whether it's residential, commercial, grounding and bonding, exam preparation, or maybe you just want to learn the NEC because you just want to get a better working knowledge of the NEC. Saves you less issues of reinstalls, arguments with inspectors, coming up with a logical way to present your point if there's a debate, and all those type of things are all valid reasons. Go over and check out our website. We also have blogs over there at the top right. You can click and read our blogs. We have message boards. We have an app you can download, and that allows you to communicate directly with us, as well as read some of our articles and get into some of those forums over on our Sparky Hub. If you haven't checked that out, thesparkyhub.com is a great way to share your images, your installs, have conversations with fellow electricians without the fear of all this BS that's involved with social media. So check that out, www.thesparkyhub.com, if you're interested in that as well. All right, so let's get into today's topic. People say, Paul, just get to it. So I'm going to get to it. So this is a very short question, but it's more of a detailed answer, and it's in two parts, because I'm going to give what I think the code says, and of course I'm going to give you my opinion on that, and of course maybe it's a third part. I'm going to give you some common sense approach to it. You could choose however your flavor is. Remember, you're the one, if you're the installer, you're the one that's got to deal with the inspectors. If you're the inspector, you're the one that needs to use a little common sense in applying the National Electrical Code, which is in many cases black and white. But in some cases, you're going to have to make a common sense interpretation of what's written in that document. And you have the power of that as a jurisdiction. Just don't make up things as you go. If you have a legitimate interpretation that supports your position, that's one thing. But just to go to a wild blank guess because you have an emotional attachment to something, maybe it's what you did when you were an installer, and now you're like, no, I'm going to make everybody do this. That's not the approach to have. So again, depends on what type of inspector you are. But so today's episode is pretty straightforward. It says, hi, Paul. Are nail plates required on metal studs for MC cable? That's it. That's a straightforward question. And I love straightforward questions because it allows me to say, well, maybe not, probably not. Is it a good idea? Maybe. And so I'm going to dig into it. And we're also going to go do a flash in the past. We're going to look at what the code panel says. And again, that's the beautiful thing about joining or being a part of NFPA and membership is that you can go back and research ROPs. Now we call them public inputs, but you can go back and kind of get the flavor of what the code panel is based on their substantiation or their responses to different submittals. And it does take a little while to do that. It does take, a little bit of digging into it. But if you're that kind of person and you want to dig into things, go for it. And you'd be surprised what you learn in the process. All right, so the question up front is talking about metal-clad cable. All right, so MC cable. Type MC, which is a metal-clad, that's under Article 330. So logically, we're going to start in 330. All right, and we're going to let the code tell us what we need to do. And I'm going to explain to you kind of my thoughts of how the code gives you specific direction, right? So in this case, we're going to be looking at 330.17 because this is specifically, we're talking about framing members. We're talking about metal studs in this case. But 330.17 states through or parallel to framing members. Now, the reason, in my opinion, it states this way is at this point, it's just talking in general. It's saying, okay, we've got studs, we've got framing members. I'm going to send you somewhere else for the guidance, but right now, that's all I'm going to say, is that's what the code says. It says type MC cable shall be protected in accordance with 300.4A, C, and D, where installed through or parallel to framing members. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of back history before we go looking at these references. First things first, there will be a certain crowd out there that will say, this reference right here sends you to 300.4. It does, but it doesn't send you to the general statement of 300.4, which says they have to be protected. That should be a given. That's already required in 300.4. The all-wire methods are protected against physical damage unless they're listed for such protection already. So that's already a given. So obviously at any point in an install, an inspector could look at something depending on how jacked up the install is and says, you know what, that is subject to physical damage. An MC cable is not permitted to be exposed to physical damage. Okay, where do we get that at? 330.12.1, who says that? Not permitted, we're subject to physical damage. So again, in this code loop that we live in, an inspector could cite that and say 300.4, general provision, that install looks like it's subject to physical damage and I need you to do something, okay? And hopefully they give you some guidance on that, right? Okay, so that's how you could get to that loop if you wanted to get to that loop. But we're gonna use old common sense here. We're gonna work through this because people say, well, dang it, why doesn't the code just say what it wants to say? Well, I'm gonna tell you something. This code is already 1.5 inches to 2 inches thick. You do not want the NEC to become an instruction manual, okay? We want to leave it up to common sense interpretation with the guidance of the technical jargon that is in the National Electrical Code, and of course the help of other people to help give some additional insight into this book, if you will. All right, so again, I'm going to read it, and then we'll move on to it, and we'll try to break this thing down. So it goes and says, through or parallel to framing members. That's a general statement. It says, type MC cable shall be protected in accordance with 300.4A, C, and D were installed through or parallel to framing members. So it's making a specific reference to A, C, and D. Now, there are many people who will say its reference to it alone doesn't matter what type of framing member it is, that it's going to have this protection. I sit in the camp where I disagree. And I like when the code tells me to go somewhere, then I want it to tell me specifically. So we're going to go look at 300.4A specifically. We're going to look at C specifically. And of course, D as well. And you wouldn't get away from me saying specifically one more time. All right. So let's do that. So we're now moving out of 330.17. And we're going to go to 300.4. Hopefully you got all your code books with you. If you're not, you're kind of jamming on down the road. Just listen, enjoy, relax, take it all in, and we will see what the code says. Okay, now 300.4, which it did not reference. It referenced the subdivisions of 300.4. So 300.4 says protection against physical damage. We're subject to physical damage. Conductors, raceways, and cables shall be protected, period. That is a true statement. And that has to take place. So if when somebody looks at an installation and it is subject to physical damage, and remember, that is not a defined term in the National Electrical Code. So AHJs being the authority having jurisdiction, the rules and enforcement that's given to them in Article 90, and what's adopted by local jurisdiction gives them that ability. But I'm going to tell them We have to use a little common sense here, but that does give them the ability. Okay. So now it makes specific reference to A, C, and D, correct? So let's look at A. A is specific for cable or raceways through wood members. So what this is saying in 330.17 is, look, if you install MC cable through a wood framing member, then you have to follow the rules in A. That's all it's saying. Through bored holes, and you have your allowances here, okay? A2, if you're going to install it notches in wood, and you're using MC, you're going to have to use and follow the rules. Now, the reason for that is typically the bored holes do not allow deflection of a cable. Now, studies were done many years ago, and they determined that MC cable is very good at deflecting when a screw or a nail, that type of thing. It's not that it can't go through it, because it obviously can. But it's very good at deflecting. However, when it goes through wood framing members, there's usually, when it comes to the annular space of the bored hole or the notch, it's usually designed in a way just big enough to get the cables through. Now, obviously with the bored hole, sometimes it's larger depending on your bored hole, but the concept is there's not a lot of ability to have any movement. All right. And again, you have obviously given less flexibility of where you install that bored hole. Whereas with a metal stud, you're punching a hole, and you typically punch it in the center, right? But even if you punched it less than 1.25 inches, the punched holes typically standard is probably going to give you more deflection. You have less chance of wood chips and particles anyway that hold a cable in place. And I'm just giving you rationale. Okay, that's all I'm giving you is rationale for it, the concept of it. You can argue that, no, that's not true. I'm just telling you my thoughts on that part of it, right? And we'll go back and look at the code. Well, actually, we're looking at an ROP from an earlier edition of the code in order to clarify some of the intent here. But I'm just giving you some of my thoughts here. But what I can tell you is 300.4a is very specific to wood. And if I'm not installing my MC cable in wood, then this is not a concern of mine. All right? Now, some will disagree, and that's fine. If it had made a direct reference to 300.4, then I could have gravitated to that. But 300.4, the general statement or the charging statement, applies anyway. So if I determine that something is subject to physical damage, then I could require some type of protection for that, because you can't install MC in a location that's subject to physical damage. You get me? So this rule A, 300.4a, is specifically referenced in 300.17 because it's dealing with wood framing members, period. Okay. Now, the next one is a reference to C, right? Now, C is dealing with cables through spaces behind panels designed to allow access. So this, again, isn't specific to any different type of framing member. It says, again, cables through spaces behind panels that are designed for me to be able to get to them. It says cables or raceway type wiring methods installed behind panels designed to allow access shall be supported according to their applicable articles. So all that is doing is turning around and sending me back and saying, you know what, you need to install it, secure it, and support it in accordance with 330.30. Follow all those rules. Happy code loop that sends you back to where you were at, and follow the installation. You're good to go. Okay. Now the next one is D. Now, D was discussed during, and I can't remember, I'm going to look when I give you the ROP on this. But you'll notice here that it doesn't make any reference to wood here, right? There's no direct reference to wood. It's talking about cables and raceways parallel to framing members and furring strips. So again, this is where we stand off the MC cable, same as we stand off NMB for doing it. You know, we stand it off, and it gives us the requirements to stand it off 1.25 inches. If we cannot stand it off, then we're going to have to put nail plates, okay, or sleeves, or something equivalent with at least 1/16 of an inch thick of steel. Okay, so if we can't achieve that separation, then we have to add that protection. And that's broad. And that's what D is dealing with. D is not specific to the framing member type. Metal, wood, composite, There's no difference here. It doesn't care. However, A is very specific to wood. Now, many people ask me, well, why does B come into play? Well, I just tell you because B doesn't come into play because it's dealing with non-metallic sheath cable and ENT. Okay, that's different. And that is through metal studs only when it is NMB and ENT. Now, I find it quite ironic, and people ask this because this has been around a while. Code's been around a while. If they intended to include something like an MC or an AC in this, then why wouldn't it be here? And it is not made it in here. Now, you can go do your research, but it never made it into B. Only deals with NMB, and it deals with ENT. Now, think about that. It would solve everybody's confusion if they're really concerned about MC, that they would put it in here and expand B to cover MC, right? But it's not here. So this is where the common sense loop starts coming into play, okay? All right, so we do see that MC cable applies to D broadly, parallel with furring strips or framing members. We understand that B doesn't apply at all because it wasn't referenced anyway. A is for when we're dealing with wood framing members, not steel. So many people, again, think that 330.17, all it's doing is sending you to the installations that are of concern. And their concern is wood framing members. Their concern is running parallel with framing members or furring strips. That is the concern for 330, all right? That's where that concern for metal-clad cable exists. Now, again, it's not to say that I'm an inspector and I walk on some really crappy installation. Again, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but I walk on some really crappy installation. And I look at it and I say, you know what? I think that MC is subject to physical damage. I need you to add some extra level of protection. You know, I could be an inspector and I could call out 300.4 and I'd have some grounds for that. But if I'm running MC cable through the board punched hole or the factory's punched holes that are in there, there's usually a lot of play. You see how big most of those holes that already come inside of the actual framing members of the metal studs. There's a lot of play. You with me? So at the end of the day, there's an ability for that cable to deflect when a nail goes in. It pushes it right out of the way because there's no tension to it enough to resist its movement. So it just flops out of the way. All right. Again, I'm just telling you how it is. You can disagree, and I'm okay with you disagreeing. You can disagree with me. Trust me. I got my share of haters out there who disagree with almost everything I say, and that is perfectly okay. Make sure you give a thumbs down if you disagree, because nobody will see it anyway, so I really don't care. All right, so now let's kind of look at what the code panel has said. So we're going to go all the way back to the 2008 ROP. And what happens is you can go back and research and get a flavor for where the code panel was and what they're saying, and you kind of get a good understanding of what their intent was. So let me give you an example. There was a code submittal that was done, and it's 3-23, and it was a change or a recommended change to 300.4A1, and it made some statements in here. It said, now I'm going to read you what the recommendation was from the submitter, and I'm going to read you what the code panel statement was, and you're going to kind of get the flavor of what we're talking about. Remember, we're talking about A, and A is dealing with wood framing members. So here was the change. Here's what this recommendation was. It said, revise text to read the following. In both exposed and concealed locations where the cable or raceway type wiring method is installed through board or cut holes in joists, rafters, wood members, or metal stud holes, shall be bored or cut so that the edge of the hole is not less than 1 1/4 inch from the nearest edge of the wood framing or metal stud. Okay, so substantiation for this submittal was contractors argue code does not need to be required, does not, so let me read this again because it's hard for me to see it. I'm getting old. Contractors argue code does not read so to require protection of MC or AC cable when installed in metal stud application. Okay, sounds like it should be cut and dry, right? The proposal was rejected. And here's the substantiation. And I'll remind you, it was rejected 13-0. Here's what they said. Section 300.4A1 is titled to apply only to bored holes in wood members. Metal framing is covered in 300.4B and applies only to non-metallic sheath cables and electrical non-metallic tubing, and does not cover MC or AC cable in metal studs. AC, MC, or flex installed in a metal stud wall can easily be installed into center of the steel stud and well away from any tech screw penetration hazards. Point blank, mic dropped. That is what the code panel said. Whether you agree it or not, they have said it in their substantiation. And this is why, for me, a code guy, I always love to go back, and I love NFPA for this because, they're kind of neutral. They put out some great documents. They got great people with NFPA, wonderful people. Jeff Sargent, superstar in our industry. But what they do is they put the information, they compile it, let the code panel do their thing, and they put it out there for review. And this code panel reviewed this and said, point blank, A is dealing with wood, period. So it is not required. Now, with that said, again, I will now shift because I believe that settles the score when it comes to that. But now I will tell you that there are submittals that actually wanted to put MC cable and AC cable in the exception to not require the nail plates. And when you read that one, and that was 3-25 for 300.4A1 exception number 1. And when you read all that explanation, then here's what the panel stated about that. Because they were trying to say that, well, if it is wood studs and I do put MC or AC in it, then I don't need the nail plates if it's less than 1.25 inches. Now that I disagree with because it's very clear in wood framing members that that's required. Whether it's, the substantiation for not doing it was pretty good. I will say the submitter was obviously very knowledgeable and was a consultant to the MC cable and armored cable industry for many, many years, NACMA. But let me read what the panel stated, because again, it's all great to look back at history. It says, while the report, so there was a report that was submitted, and the report that was submitted, and it's available for review at the NFPA headquarters, was a report where they looked at it and they did an evaluation of it, and they did a fact-finding study, and they found that it was less prone for MC cable or AC cable to basically not be subject to the same type of damage because of the way it's designed, and it can move back and forth. And anyway, so it's a really good fact-finding study that you probably can go dig up and find it. And if I have to get you the name of it, it was actually called, it was a fact-finding study by UL on nail penetration of type AC and MC cable installed parallel to framing members. So this rule was trying to get something in there and say, look, even if it's dealing in A1, which is not about paralleling the framing members, it's trying to say, look, it will deflect, it will move, it has a, its survivability rate is much higher. Okay. Well, here's what the code panel said. And by the way, they did reject it 13-0. They said, while the report does suggest that AC and MC interlocked cable may provide better protection from nails and screw penetrations than other wiring methods, this does not in itself permit the removal of this cabling method from this section of the code. Installations of AC, MC, or other assembled cables should be protected within the 1.25 inch dimensions to reduce the possibility of reworking the installation after the building finished materials are complete. Raceways and conduit systems provide a way to remove damaged wiring, and cable assemblies do not. Added protection should be required for assembled cables for this purpose. Okay, so when people read that, they go, well, okay, now I'm confused. All right, what am I confused? No, you have to remember what the exception is to. So exception is to installing the MC in wood framing members. Okay, that was what the exception was to. So you can't infer that means anything else. You might want to, and there's people out there that will try. You can't. It wasn't inferring to that. It was dealing with a direct response to trying to get an exception where I don't have to use nail plates in wood framing members if I'm using MC or AC or flexible. So that's what that was about. So I just thought it brings a little additional context to it. Hey, look, if you want to research these things, go over to nfpa.org. You can simply go over to where it says, I guess if I'm telling you how to get there, I usually don't do that, but I'll tell you, you go and you see there's a codes and standards section, click on it where it says list of NFPA codes and standards. You click on it, go down to NFPA 70, click on it. And if you're a member, you will be able to see where it says current and prior editions. You click on it and you can go down and select the code edition that you're working in. That way you can look at it and be able to submit, see what took place in 2008 edition of the NEC. Okay. So that's just kind of a way you can research things if you want. Okay. So I'm going to wrap this podcast up at the end and saying, I do not believe when I'm answering this question that it does require any type of separation an inch and a quarter when it comes to metal studs and MC and AC cable. And I didn't look at AC cable just to make sure that it makes the same reference. Let me do that because, there'll be those haters out there because everybody's got them. And they think they can do a better job, but yet they don't put out any videos or podcasts. So again, kind of questioning that, right? Yes, still says 300.4 A, C, and D. So they're the only ones that are applicable. So wrapping this up, I will tell you that we have to also think about it. And you as an installer have to think about what the risk is. If it's studs that are metal and there's a lot of play in it in the MC and they're the punched ones in the middle, prefabbed, whatever, trust me, you don't have to worry about that. It's fine. If you're punching your holes and they're 1/2-inch holes, let's say, and it's over near the edge, you might want to use a little common sense and put a nail plate. Try to keep them in the center. Okay. The AHJ could interpret 300.4 as literally, and if he looks at something that says, I'm worried about that install, I want you to do something. Well, you look at him and go, do you want me to put a nail plate on it? He'll go, yeah, that'd be fine. Yep, please do. So the moral of that story, if you install them properly in the middle of the stud, then I don't think you'll ever get a grief from an inspector. He'll say, you know what, that's fine. It's in the middle of the stud. You punched it properly. Good to go. If you use the factory ones, they're usually square and they're big anyway. So you don't have a problem with that. It's when you start doing things that bring things into question, then that's when they can start bringing up something like 300.4 and say, you know what, I think that's subject to physical damage. And MC cable is not to be installed where subject to physical damage because of their proximity. I need you to do something more. That's a reasonable request from an inspector. But if you punch it right in the middle of that stud and you put an MC in there and he comes along and says, I want nail plates on all that, then I would bark back. I would push back and say, where does it say that in the code? And he'll say, anybody could drive a screw through it or nail through it. Then wait a minute. So even in a wood framing, if I do bore a hole in the middle and it's at least 1 1/4 inch from the edge of the bored hole, are you telling me I still need nail plates? And the answer to that is no. So this is why you have to use common sense. So I'm gonna wrap this one up, but I will tell you again, very clearly, in my opinion, metal studs, if you punch the hole in the middle, does not have to be have nail plates on it. Okay. All right. That's my rule. In fact, if you're less than 1 1/4 inch and you're not a center, I don't believe you need nail plates unless, of course, the AHJ invokes 300.4 in general and has a strong feeling that is subject to some type of physical damage on that MC. Then if he wants to him or her want to hang their hat on that, then you put a nail plate on it and move on. But my moral of the story to you is metal studs should be easy to punch it in the middle, or you use the factory ones that already have punched. Stay in the middle of the stud. Don't need to use nail plates. Keep everybody happy and move on. Till next time, folks, stay safe. God bless and happy Thanksgiving to everybody in this special Thanksgiving edition.